You became the most famous scientist in Ireland during a period where there was wide-scale global collapse. How did that affect you emotionally and personally?
This is the most relevant biomedical story in the past 100 years. I became very conscious of that pretty quickly myself. I was on many news outlets. I was on CNN. I made America. And then secondly, I'd be on RTE as well. The big fear was that I get it wrong. That was something that would worry me slightly, you know. As a scientist, you want to get the facts right. In this situation, I became very aware that people were listening to every word. They were very frightened, especially older people. People over 60 were especially scared, you know. And suddenly I began to realize they've got a big responsibility now, because my mission is to help, remember, and to get the information out there and keep people informed. And the bottom line, of course, was science will get us through this. And I realized eventually it was about giving people hope.
Luke O'Neill is one of the most cited immunologists in the entire world, and he's dedicated his life to studying the inflammation mechanisms within the human body. His fame skyrocketed during the COVID-19 pandemic, when he became the most followed scientist in Ireland and the go-to communicator for all things virus. He's written multiple best-selling science books and is an astoundingly good scientific communicator as a lecturer in Trinity College Dublin. But far more importantly than that is Luke O'Neill's discovery in blocking an essential inflammatory process in the body. This is through inhibiting a molecule called NLRP3. The importance of this discovery cannot be over-exaggerated. Inflammation underpins so many neurological conditions in the brain, like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and many others. And blocking this pathway could be a revolutionary way in treating them. So much so that his biotech company Inflazome was sold for a crazy $380 million, and 3 separate drugs from Inflazome are currently in clinical trials for Parkinson's disease.
All my career, I've tried to find novel anti-inflammatory drugs. That's been a key mission for me all the way along. In the year, 2012, it began really. We've stumbled into a very potent anti-inflammatory molecule, a very important master switch for inflammation. A good example is Parkinson's disease, to be honest, because in that disease, a protein called alpha-synuclein builds up in your brain. And that drives inflammation, and that damages the brain. So it's been kicking around for a while, and we found a way to block it.
What do we really know about how the COVID virus affects the brain, and what do we know about long COVID?
One recent breakthrough in Trinity was that the blood-brain barrier seems to be breached, and that's quite a dangerous thing, because then many things can get from your blood into your brain. Your microbiome and your gut might leak things into your brain.
What have we learned about how to deal with global pandemics?
Let's get mobilized quickly with ventilation, with masks. And then the other thing, of course, is the great news is we can get going on an RNA vaccine very quickly. It's proven itself now. You can make an RNA vaccine within weeks, and that's the big way to protect us through this vaccination stuff.
Rapid fire questions. Bald men didn't get as sick during the pandemic?
There was some evidence for that, yes. Testosterone seemed to have some protective effect, maybe. That was a good one, yeah.
Men were affected more in the COVID pandemic than women were?
They were more severe in men. For that still holds up, actually. Men are inclined to do worse with COVID, and they still do. Yeah, that's true.
Do you think China concealed important information at the start of the COVID pandemic that would help the rest of the world?
That's hard to know. I mean, our big question there is,
was there any proven efficacy with ivermectin? Most interesting thing you've ever learnt in science? This podcast is the biggest one that we've done to date, and it has special significance to me as Luke was my first lecturer in Trinity in my degree and my first introduction to biology. I still remember the goosebumps he gave our class when he told the greatest story in the history of science. A single event that occurred 2.3 billion years ago where one bacteria jumped inside another and became the ancestor for the entire human species. Luke is an inspiration to the Giant's Shoulder podcast, and this episode surpassed every expectation that I had. If you're interested in learning more about the brain from genuine experts in neuroscience, then subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This is only the start, and things are going to get way better from here. Enjoy the episode. Professor Luke O'Neill, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Giant's Shoulder podcast. You became the most famous scientist in Ireland during a period where there was wide-scale global collapse. How did that affect you emotionally and personally?
Well, it was the strangest thing. For a scientist to be recognized in the street, I thought, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Something that we're not used to, obviously, you know. Well, it's still happening, by the way. People still come up to me. It's quite nice, you know. It's 99% positive. They thank me for the information I gave out, you know.
Yeah.
I guess at the time, it was just very intense, is my main memory of it. It was every day. I was doing lots of stuff for News Talk and RTE and all kinds of things. And it wasn't just me, Evan, as you know. Many of my colleagues were doing it too. So there was a group of us. And it was very rewarding in the end, actually, because people were very grateful. And my job, as you know, is to get information out there anyway, either through
Yeah.
my lectures or my research or my conferences and all these kinds of things. I didn't see it any different to my day job, really, but it was just pretty intense. And the big fear was that I get it wrong. That was something
Yeah.
that would worry me slightly,
Yeah, of course.
because obviously, as a scientist, you want to get the facts right. And especially when there's such a focus on you, if you got something wrong, that'll be bad. So it was hard work, I guess, as well.
Absolutely. I mean, you were clearly the right man for the job then, because I know you've been a scientific communicator your whole life, but I would expect that the level of escalation in your viewership, in the amount of people that were basically at your beck and call, listening at every word, really in a situation where everyone was in such uncertainty. I mean, even scientists, right? I mean, did you experience anything novel and challenging in that? Because it's got to be a lot different to what you've experienced in the past. I mean, a lot different for everybody.
Wonder, I was doing it before anyway, but as you know, I was on News Talk since 2013, in fact, with a science slot with Pat Kenny. So I was kind of well used to it at one level. But of
Yeah.
course, in this situation, I became very aware that people were listening to every word. They were very frightened, especially older people. People over
Yeah.
60 were especially scared. And suddenly I began to realize they've got a big responsibility now because I wanted to help. My mission is to help, remember, and to get the information out there and keep people informed. And the bottom line, of course, was science will get us through this, which is what happened, as we know. And we all knew that would be the case. And I realized eventually it was about giving people hope. And that was very different from me talking about some breakthrough in Alzheimer's disease or whatever it might be, even though that does have a hope aspect as well.
Yeah.
This was exponentially more important. And then I realized as well that other people, other experts were slightly more glass half empty kind of approach, which is fine. As scientists, you've got to be honest. And
Yeah.
I knew that maybe I could counter that slightly and say, look, it is tough. And I never tried to sugarcoat it. I'd say, look, there's tough things happening, but we will get through it. That was my overarching message was science is great, which it always is. That's always the message
Yes.
I give anyway. And this is a way to win it. Now, I was worried, but I mean, the vaccine could have taken a lot longer. Certainly, by the time we get to June, July of 2020, there were no guarantees. And I knew that, and I thought, good Lord, this could go on for a long time now unless we get this
Yeah.
breakthrough that we're looking for. And then we get to November, never forget it, and Pfizer announced its top line trial data. And I actually shed a tear because I realized this is the beginning of the end, as it were, because I knew
Yeah.
that we were going to get out of it. So that was all very, you're right. The word emotion definitely comes into it because it was a very fraught time.
It has to. Like I joke that there wasn't an Irish mammy that didn't know your name and have a newly minted immunology degree following you on the radio, which I was very upset with my mom because I've been talking to her about science for years and she never seemed to care. She never seemed to
No,
listen to me.
no.
And then
Yeah.
as soon as you were talking on the radio, she was like, I have to get my Professor Luke now. He's gonna tell me how the pandemic is going on. I was like,
Yeah.
I've been talking to you about science for years, ma'am.
It's taken a long time. Well, that just shows you, again, it was the emotional connection is what happened there, you see. You can talk about stuff about science in the media a lot, and you don't really connect with most people
Yeah.
unless it's emotional. And if someone has a disease, they'll be very interested in what you're saying.
Yeah.
In this case, everybody was at risk of this. The whole world was at risk of a very serious disease. So therefore, they were all plugged into it, and they were reacting then in an emotional way as well as in hopefully in a rational way, which is what the goal of it was anyway, to make people respond in a reasonable way as well.
Yeah. Were you thinking in any way purposely that this is a different form of scientific communication, that your role was decidedly different now in the next year or so, as someone who, I don't know if you volunteered, you were the right person for the job, but everyone sort of went to you for that advice, and I think you were absolutely the right man for it. But did you consciously think that this is distinctly different to what I've done in the past? The weight of this responsibility is larger, the uncertainty is larger, the amount of fear, the amount of widespread its importance to this information. Was that a conscious thing that you sort of registered?
It wasn't really, I was too busy doing it, first of all. I mean,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
full on. I was on Pat Kenny 3 days a week on the radio for 30 minutes at a time sometimes, Evan. And normally I'm on for
yeah,
10 minutes. And then secondly, I'd be on RTE as well. I was on many news outlets. I was on CNN. I made America. I was on CNN in America.
yeah,
So it was full on more than anything else. My memory of it is a very, as I say, very busy, intense time. It ramped up what my approach would have been before. find something new, get the facts out, and that I've been doing that for years anyway. But of course, this is the most relevant biomedical story in the past 100 years. I became very conscious of that pretty quickly myself. And remember,
Yeah.
I'm in the thick of it as well. And I'm worrying about vaccines. I want to know what's going to happen. I'm
Yeah.
watching all the numbers like everybody was. My own lab began to work on COVID, of course, pretty quickly because many labs switched into COVID research, and
Yeah.
we worked on the more therapeutic side. We don't work on vaccines. We work on anti-inflammatories, as you may know, the more therapeutic kind of thing. So my lab had 5 people working on the disease. Can you
Yeah.
believe it? That added
Yeah.
an extra huge relevance to what I was doing. So that was all in the mix as well. And I think, but again, the big difference here was people were scared. And I realized that my job was to try to reassure them overall. And that wouldn't be the case normally when you're doing science communication. You wouldn't be trying to reassure people.
Exactly.
You,
Yeah.
you might be telling people, oh, there might be potentially a treatment for a disease, or some brand new discovery here that's interesting scientifically. That message is about science anyway and the scientific process. But this was a different thing entirely, you know?
Yeah. I'm curious to hear more on that process of how you do change the area of research. So you could be looking at something quite differently. Obviously, you specialize in anti-inflammatories and the mechanism of inflammation. So there's a lot of parallels there. Your lab scientists would have been very well versed in that literature, a very good understanding of that biochemistry. But talk me through that process of how you do that pivot. You always talk about pivots
Yeah.
in business where you change your idea, but there isn't many pivots in science that would happen that rapidly. At least that would be my understanding. I'm curious to hear more about that process.
Yeah, there was honestly a slight pivot. So what we work on in my lab is inflammation in the broadest sense. Now, inflammation happens
Yeah.
if you've got a tissue injury, if you sprain your ankle, that gets inflamed. But it also happens during infection. And I had worked on things like bacterial infections. I'd worked on viruses in the past. I worked on vaccinia, which is the vaccine for smallpox, for instance. I'd done collaborations with people on things like hepatitis C. So I was in the area anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And therefore, it wasn't that difficult to switch. The big thing I work on are inflammatory cytokines, as you may remember. And
Yeah.
they were up in COVID. And they're the things that cause some of the damage in COVID. That became clear. We knew anyway that cytokines are problematic during infections. Like, for example, one big thing we do is sepsis and septic shock. Now, that is a bacterial infection. But it's your own cytokines that are harming you, you know? Exactly the same in COVID. So I knew that. I said, right, let's switch into COVID now, you know? And so, for example, instead of adding a bacteria to our experiments, we added a virus. And we had a collaboration with a big lab in Sydney who were working on COVID. We couldn't work on COVID here because it's a P3 pathogen. But my collaborator in Sydney had it in his lab, and I'd be sending him samples. He'd be measuring various possible therapeutic angles in his lab and sending data back to me. So
Yeah.
we began to work on it pretty
Great.
quickly in the end. So it wasn't that difficult to switch into it. And then the second thing I'd say is we were also working on coagulation strategy. And the blood will clot during infection. And not to trap the bug, actually. The main reason the blood clots is you want to wall off the bacteria or indeed the virus and stop it spreading in your body, you know. And that became part of COVID, a coagulopathy. And my student at the time, Tristram Ryan, he began working on COVID and coagulation. So again, it wasn't a huge leap to switch into it. Now,
Yeah.
I couldn't have switched into vaccines because I don't work on those. They're not my expertise.
Yeah.
I think many labs like mine, they said, oh, look, I have a skill set here. I have an interest in a certain area. I can now apply that to COVID quite readily, if
Yeah.
it's possible to apply. In my case, it was, you know, and that's all that happened, really.
Yeah, it's probably an underestimated point that I don't know if the general population really understand how much overlap there is in a lot of these viruses. When they have distinct names, they can often be thought of being completely distinct. But it's interesting that you were able to quite easily pivot into it because the pathways down, once you get down to the molecular levels, there's quite a lot of overlap.
There is overlap, exactly, yes. And my other big area of research is called innate immunity. And innate immunity are the built-in defenses in your body. And several of those sense viruses. And we'd worked on those. We'd worked on one called TLR3, TLR7. These are awful things. But they sense viruses. I'd done stuff on those 15, 20 years ago. And not COVID. Hadn't come along yet, you know. So there's like a massive amount of overlap in the immune system in terms of some of the common features.
Yeah.
Of course, what's fascinating is their specificities and differences as well.
Yeah.
And we know that SARS-CoV-2 has certain differences to other coronaviruses for a start, you know. And the big one we worry about is long COVID. That's the thing that's emerged very clearly now. It seems especially prone to driving these persistent symptoms. You do see it with other viruses like post-flu fatigue and so on, but this seems especially problematic, and that's something that may be a bit different. So there are similarities and differences.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into long COVID later on because I think that's a very interesting one. I've been reading Keep Calm and Trust the Science, which is a brilliant journal of basically the events as it goes on. It's really entertaining. But one of the things that caught me, that quite interested me, was in those early days when there was a lot of uncertainty. People didn't really know how it was going to spread, what the mechanisms were. That there were a lot of assumptions that were made at that time that turned out to be wrong. You know, there was a startling sentence in the paragraph which was some other immunologist in a bar kind of asked you, what is the probability that we'd be able to catch this twice? And you said, unlikely. Well, it's just funny, you know, because now standing here, I got it 5 times, never seriously. But you know, what were some of those things that you were really shocked by? That your knowledge of immunology and background in immunology was kind of not beaten, but just it was changed because this had kind of
Well,
created almost new categories.
it's science in action, Evan. Remember, I mean, you know certain things
Yeah,
at the moment, and you make conclusions based on that knowledge. But that might change as
yeah,
new data comes along, and that's not. Now, of course, the general public don't like that. They want to know for definite what the
yeah,
situation is. But science isn't like that. Science is a process. It stumbles along often from one point, finally reaches the truth eventually, you know, but there can be stumbles and reversals along the way, you know, and that was the same with this. So
yeah,
initially we thought, look, it'll be like a standard infection. You'll catch it, you'll build up immunity. If you're vaccinated, fantastic. And then you should see protection against subsequent infections, you know. That's not the case with this virus. It does keep reinfecting people.
yeah,
Now, that wasn't clear early on. It became clear as time went by, obviously enough. We think it's because it mutates quite quickly, remember? And that means it can dodge the immune system slightly. But remember, you still will be protected from severe disease. So even though people get reinfected, the reinfection will slightly milder probably than the first infection because some of your immune system is there to defend you, you know. So,
yeah,
so one slight surprise was the risk of reinfection became clear. The second thing was, of course, the vaccines. They need to be boosted. Now, that was something else that came along. Now, some vaccines are like that. They do need booster shots. We were hoping it would be like the yellow fever virus. One shot for life. Wouldn't that be tremendous? One shot will protect you for life for yellow fever. Not the
yeah,
case with this one, especially if you're older and you're more vulnerable. You need booster shots. So that was the second thing that became clear to us. The
yeah,
big one most of all, even though, in my opinion, was it became clear that aerosols weren't the route of transmission. Early on, we thought it was aerosol, which meant
yeah,
quite large droplets were spreading it. That's the way it is with flu. They're mainly large droplets. This is different. This is a little flimsy thing on the air. It can spread anywhere in a room, you know. Hence the 2 meter rule wasn't
yeah,
as important suddenly, you know. Because if you're in a
yes,
bar and there's people there and it's a huge big room, it'll eventually permeate the entire tiny aerosols spread as opposed to droplets. And that
yes.
wasn't clear early on. Early on, we all thought it was a droplet-based transmission, and yet it wasn't. It was aerosol-based. And again, it illustrates how science is so important. To discover things, you got to observe things, have a hypothesis, do an experiment, and then get evidence for something. And that was the same with this as it went along. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there is a difficulty with scientific communication because you're right that people want definite facts and they don't want a science in the moment. They want absolute facts and truths that persist through time.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can try to? I think you're dead right that we just need to keep taking the evidence and then keep adjusting our conclusions, keep adjusting the hypothesis, keep testing. But is there anything else we can do as scientific communicators to, you know, to get that point across? Is that we don't have all the answers. We're making
Yeah.
good hypotheses in the moment. We're taking in the data. We're trying our best. But at the moment, it seems there's such a disillusionment towards science. You know, there's huge
Yeah.
anti-science movements, anti-vax movements, anti-mask movements. People don't like that. You know, do you think there's anything that we can do on the scientific communication side to, I
Well,
don't
the
know,
great,
to
the great, the great Tony Fauci early on. You heard of Tony? He
yeah,
said something that really resonated with me at the time. This is in the first few months of the pandemic, and I heard him give a speech somewhere. And he said, anybody trying to communicate this stuff, there's three things you must remember, right? First of all, only speak if you got data. That's the first thing. Is there data to support what you're saying, right?
yeah,
Number two, if you don't know the answer, say you don't know, right?
yeah,
And number three, it's not about you. It's about getting the information out. And I carried those three with me. I
yeah,
knew it already, kind of, you know, it rammed home what was so important there. And so, therefore, you've got to take that approach. The second thing is the tricky bit is when you're a scientist and you make a discovery, you normally say something like the data suggests this,
yeah,
or the evidence is consistent with this. You don't say this is what it is. You know?
yeah,
And if you do say this is what it is, your fellow scientists will dig into you because you're being far too definitive.
yeah,
New data might arise and new evidence might emerge that shows you're wrong, you know, and that kind of thing. Eventually, we do get to truths like DNA is a double helix, for instance. So we can claim this. And of course, as you know, Evan, the history of science, the notion of laws came along, and they were great things, weren't they?
Yeah.
Boyle's law, that's true. There's no question that's true. But when you get to more complicated things, there's always a sort of a chance that you may not be fully correct in what you say. But the public don't want that. They want to say, will this cause cancer? Yes or no?
Yes, like that's possibly a yes or no answer.
Yeah, I think you've got to do your best, and you've got to be there for them and say, look, the evidence definitely suggests this. That sort of phrasing is useful, and that might reassure them slightly, But you've got to be careful, especially with journalists, because they want the headline, they want to go, whatever it might be in very clear terms. So it's a very delicate balancing act. I think with anti-science, it's very hard to counter that, actually. And a certain percent of people will never be convinced.
Yeah.
They'll always accuse you of having a vested interest. They'll always accuse you of being paid by someone. They'll always accuse you of trying to be famous and all that kind of thing, And you'll never win over them. It's the ones slightly innovative or slightly doubtful who might nudge you into that. They're the ones you want to work on and try to help and bring them towards what you think is the way it should be. A great story, Evan, during the pandemic, I remember, is the movie Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a piece for the Sunday Independent paralleling the pandemic with Jaws,
Okay.
And I said, look, okay, the guy, remember the movie Jaws? The guy who's in charge of the resort, he's the businessman. He wants to open all the restaurants. That's like the business people,
Uh-huh.
You've got Hooper, who's me, the scientist, trying to, that's dangerous. There's a shark out there. It's going to kill us, this kind of thing. And of course, Brody is every man. He's all of us together. And there's a great scene when someone puts graffiti on a poster of a big black fin of a shark, right? And Hooper says to the Lord Mayor, look, he says, there's a dangerous shark out there. You got to keep the beaches closed. That picture was drawn to scale. That's how big this shark is, right? And the business guy goes, you'd like that, wouldn't you? You want your name in National Geographic, don't you? So I was getting that. You want to be famous. You'd love that, wouldn't you? If it was a dangerous thing, this guy. See, it's very hard to win with these people, isn't it?
Yeah.
And another great thing I like, Evan, is I used to quote Erasmus a lot during this. Now, Erasmus was a great scholar, as you may know. He said, reasoned debate is the only way to get to the truth.
Yeah.
If the debate gets nasty, if it gets personal, everybody's mind goes off kilter, and we all start shouting at each other, and we don't get to the truth. You got to have reasoned debate. Like scientists mainly have reasonable debates. And I was trying to argue the case, look, all this nastiness is not helpful at all,
Yeah.
So let's try to keep the debate reasoned, base it on data, and if you don't know the answer, say you don't know. You can't go far wrong if you follow that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all of that. My worry is that reasoned debate is being countered by this media channel at the moment, which is very sensationalist. It's very extremist. It's very clickbaity. It's very fast paced. It's not reasoned. It's not nuanced. It's not maybe this, but also this. There's some counter evidence here, but also some interesting evidence here. It's A does B. Like this food causes cancer. This makes you lose weight. And it's so hard to counter that because the quick, sensationalist, extremist stuff is going to get clicks for people, and it's going to get in orders of tens and hundreds of thousands of times more views than the video about the reasoned debate. That's kind of what I'm trying to counter with this podcast. But
you're up against it because it's human nature to go for the sensational stuff. It's just to be frightened,
Yeah.
It's human nature not to trust someone. These are all primordial responses that people have, And it's also human nature to be lazy, which is, I'll just go for the one-liner. I can't be arsed putting my effort into it,
Yeah.
So it's tricky because you're up against that. And that's why education is so important, actually. A good, strong education system in science is essential.
Yeah.
Get science going in schools from when they're 2 years of age.
Yeah.
And then they're able to handle complexity, or they're able to address things and make their own minds up and look at it and not jump for the easy, quick one-liner, this kind of thing. That's one of the key functions of science. It's not so much, I don't think science education should be about training scientists per se. It's just to give people skills to allow them to navigate this very complex world that we're living in. And if you give them those skills, then they can approach, should I take a vaccine or not?
Yeah.
Should I put on sunblock? Whatever it might be, should I exercise? These kinds of things, and they can help people in their lives, really.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your thoughts on something, because when I was going through Trinity, you're actually a past professor of mine, the best one I ever had, and not enough lectures. Yeah. But when I was going through my scientific degree, I always wanted there to be more communication aspect. I actually thought communication should be an entire specialty in of itself, because there's a lot of people that do science and obviously, bleed into medicine, bleed into business, don't become researchers. I think there would be another maybe 25% or a large chunk of people that would go specifically towards communication. I would have loved to learn in college, and this was so far departed from what we did learn, but video creation with science, how to animate brain parts. This was what I was fascinated in. I really wanted to be a scientific communicator, communicate these incredibly cool ideas. And I thought that communication should have been a whole avenue. How would you wave your magic wand if you could change the scientific education? What things would you be thinking to change?
Well, there's two types, isn't there, Evan, in a way? There's your specialist communication as a scientist. And remember, I'm sure when you were in Trinity, you did a fourth year project and you would have to make a presentation and a poster, that end of it.
Yeah.
And that's a really important skill, by the way, because
Yeah.
because when you go out in the big bad world as a PhD student or a postdoc or a professor, you got to communicate your science to specialists as well, remember, because your job is to disseminate
Yeah.
and to move it forward. That's one type. And there's a bit on that, I think. The other bit, just science communication in general, you're quite right. It'd be very useful to have modules and instruction, because it wouldn't just apply to the person as a scientist. You'd learn skills that could be very transferable into any walk of life, really, because how do you take a complicated idea? How do you explain it in a way that's accessible? That can apply across any discipline. Doesn't that just have to be science? So
Yeah.
I'll be very much in favour of introducing some of that as well. I
Yeah.
think you do get it as a postgrad more, and of course there are postgraduate qualifications in science communication, aren't there? But there's no harm in getting it in early because it would help you. What I've noticed about myself personally, when I began doing more lay audience communication, and it began with the science gallery really in earnest for me,
Hmm.
that helped me in my science communication.
Absolutely.
I could design my slides a bit better for a specialist audience in a way that was clear in a way.
Yeah.
In other words, it transfers into the general communication back and forth. There's the crosstalk between the two. So a
Absolutely.
benefit of having science communication in general,
Yeah.
it'll help the other bit anyway. They'll both feed off each other, really, I think. So I'm very much in favour of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of researchers, I think every researcher could really benefit from that, because there is a bit of an idea that research papers are intrinsically hard to read. I mean, it's complicated topics, of
Yeah.
course. It's very in depth. It's very complex. But there is a sense to me that they were always made a little bit unnecessarily difficult. And there was a bit of a sense to me as well that researchers would actually go out of their way to make their paper complex because it kind of amplified their position a little bit. I'm
Yes.
incredibly smart. Look how complicated this paper is. And just bad communication. It might help you get into a journal because it just looks so complex and difficult. But as you know, that's not how we communicate. And I actually think it creates quite a large wall between research papers and a lay audience, where there doesn't have to be at least as much of a wall there. Like there surely is a way to condense those papers into a way that's at least communicated to a general audience.
That's a new. I've never had. That's a good idea. I haven't had that before, Evan. To be honest, it's a really good idea. It's partly because science papers are very formulaic. I mean, ChatGPT can write them now.
Yeah.
The intro is always the same. It's come to our attention that this is the situation here. It's like whatever the lines are. The data part is figure one shows this, and then the discussion. They're very formulaic. They're very dull.
Yeah. Very much so.
Accessible to even an expert, actually, strangely. So if I stray outside my immediate expertise in immunology into different, I have trouble reading those papers as well.
Yeah.
So you're quite right. There'll be real skill here in terms of getting people to write these scientific papers in a way that's more accessible, for definite. And I haven't heard that described as clearly as you've just said it there, and that would help everybody really. And then, of course, why wouldn't the lay audience somehow get access to this anyway?
Exactly.
They're paying for it often through their taxes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I like that.
Look, I don't think we've put the peer review scientific industry under a microscope in a while to see how it might adapt to the new forms of media. Like, I would love to see research papers in video form. I know it's complicated for a scientist to be able to do that and present it, but if there was a way that a lab could produce a paper and hand it off to a scientific communicator like myself, who would be able to dissect it down, put some animations on it, make it communicable, make it highly entertaining, engaging, I think you would have a much better communication between the scientists and the general population. There'd be much better conversation there, much more interplay, much more back and forth, much more trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you do see sometimes you see a bit of that. I've seen that done at conferences where someone has to give a 5-minute lay type presentation. For example, I've also seen you see videos of techniques and things, people in labs doing the techniques and the papers. There's a bit of that going on.
Yeah.
Heading in that direction, I think ultimately it may well continue along those lines, and especially as we now enter this new era of AI, actually, and of the TikTok generation, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
This has to be beneficial to us all. Of course, the trouble is you don't want to dumb it down too much,
Yeah.
You don't want to take away from the seriousness of the data and the all that kind of thing either. So there's probably a balancing act needed there. But
Yeah.
certainly, new ways of communicating this stuff would benefit everybody, really.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if you're thinking of starting a new company, send me an email. I think we could. I think we could make this
That's
happen.
your idea now.
I think we could be innovators on this. I'd be glad to
Copyright that
have you as
idea.
a partner. I'd love to have you as a partner. I am looking back at it now, going through all of the global pandemic. I mean, of course, we're still living in it, but we're past hopefully major lockdowns. All of this. What have we learned about how to deal with global pandemics? Like, what big lessons are there from it?
Yeah, it's good. That's a big question. I don't know. I mean, the next one, let's think about the next one, okay? So the next one, it'll be respiratory again, because that's how they spread the fastest. If the next pandemic is in the water, say, let's say it's a waterborne disease, you can control that more quickly. You can
Hmm.
purify the water for a start, for instance, you know? If it's in blood, as many infections are, like things like Ebola, they're easy to contain because someone has to bleed and it's blood transmission. If it's in the air, that's what causes these pandemics. Now, what have we learned? The next airborne pandemic, let's get mobilized quickly with ventilation, with masks, two big help. We know those two things help tremendous. Even air purifiers. I mean, if it was me, I'd even put air purifiers in the schools now because that'll keep the schools open. And remember in the
Interesting. Yeah.
winter, it had the windows open, they were all freezing cold. Why not have the classroom now? Because that would be a sensible investment to make, I think,
Yeah.
And then the other thing, of course, is the great news is we can get going on an RNA vaccine very quickly. It's proven itself now. You can make an RNA vaccine within weeks, which is tremendous,
Yeah.
into trials. So if a new pandemic starts now, within about 6 months, we'll have a vaccine available, which will be, and even sooner, you never know, tremendous add-on then. That's the big way to protect us, is through this vaccination stuff. So those are the kinds of things to be thinking about for a future pandemic. I think
Yeah.
the next thing, though, to worry about is public compliance, the social side of it, the naysayers, all that aspect. I don't know how we're going to handle that. I don't know
Yeah.
if there wasn't a pandemic next year, say, there'll be a huge amount of dissent about locking down, for instance, because
Yeah.
people suffered so much through the lockdown. It was awful for them, So I'm not quite sure how you handle that one. I would think, I always felt, by the way, having a medical solution was the only way out. I knew these public health measures were okay, but they were never going to work in the long run. And people
Yeah.
get fed up and don't want to comply with them when it causes all this agitation, So I knew the way out of this was science. It was through the
Yeah.
scientific process, which meant vaccines and antivirals. They're the two main weapons to use against this virus and future viruses. So
Yeah.
you'd be deploying those weapons as quickly as you can, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's incredibly hard to say because hindsight is 2020. We have a lot more view of the information now. But do you think at any point any of the lockdowns were unjustified in their strictness? Like I live in Barcelona now. My sister was not allowed to leave her apartment.
Yeah.
People were renting dogs in apartments so they can bring the dog for a walk because you were allowed to walk a dog, but you weren't allowed to walk a human.
Right.
And which was an interesting one. So there was one over heavily walked Labrador in that apartment block that
There
was getting a
was.
good 30 walks a day. But again, hard to say. But do you think any of those really strict lockdowns were justified?
You've got to have sympathy for the governments in this situation. Because if they
Absolutely.
make a decision and they get it wrong, people die. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
government wanted to risk that. And they
Yeah.
all began to follow each other. Herd mentality came in. And in Ireland, we loosened it in that Christmas, as you may remember.
Yeah.
There was this meaningful Christmas. Fair few people died because of that. There's no doubt that cases went through the roof.
Yeah.
They realised by St. Stephen's Day, lock down again, quick for God's sake, because the
Yeah. Yeah.
hospitals were beginning to fill up. So it's very difficult in hindsight to say that they get it right or wrong.
Of course.
In retrospect, we probably didn't need such a stringent second lockdown. I would have kept the schools open the second time around. That turns out to be too damaging.
Yeah.
So it's always a balancing act between how much harm you do with a measure versus the benefits of that measure.
Yeah.
Keeping kids out of school is not great anyway. And now the trouble with that was, by the way, the teachers' unions might have refused to go into classrooms.
Yeah.
They didn't want to get exposed to the virus either. So it's tricky, very hard to know,
Of
I
course
think
it is.
overall, we probably did the best we could in the circumstances. And remember, as a moving target, our knowledge was incomplete all through this, remember. The big fear would have been Omicron could have killed everybody.
Yeah.
We know that meaningful Christmas, it was the Delta variant was brought back from London probably to Ireland and then began to take off here, these kinds of things. So there was all those uncertainties in the mix as well. So in retrospect, I don't think we did too bad. I wouldn't be too critical of what the government in many countries did. Of
Yeah.
course, we'll compare one country to another. As you may remember, the Swedes had the most loose situation. It was easy for them. They've got the best healthcare system in Europe.
Yeah.
they can take a risk on that. We couldn't have risked that because our healthcare system crap.
Yeah, yeah.
Secondly, in Sweden, many single occupancy households, that's a key variable that will stop the spread. We've more multiple occupancy households. So simple comparisons were never acceptable really in that regard.
Yeah.
And again, criticism of people because of the decisions they were making based on those non-scientific comparisons was an issue, I think. So
Yeah.
my overall opinion, I don't think we did too bad.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I don't have a political leaning one way or the other that's very stringent. I think it was highly information. Like we just did not have the information we needed
Yep.
to make decisions, and it was very difficult. I was very cautious of mental health, like I think you were. I think a lot of people were. We didn't know what would happen from a mental health perspective. Do we have any good data of, what was the increases in generalized anxiety disorders, depression
I think
across the bank?
there are numbers, aren't there? I mean, a lot of that went up dramatically. I mean, especially in teenagers, for instance, and you can understand why.
Yeah.
You're cutting off someone from developing their lives at a very important time, and you superimpose anxiety about a virus on top of that, then you're going to get certain, not for everybody, it's the vulnerable are the ones who suffered, of course. I think that's one definitely the incidence of mental health issues went up an awful lot because of this, for all kinds of reasons,
Yeah.
I mean, we all wonder, will these people be scarred, actually? Will it always be there for them? Like, if you were 18 years of age at the height of this, what would it be like when you're in your 40s? There may be still something there, we don't know. So I think it's a very important thing to keep an eye on. I always felt at the time that there would be mental health problems, and we could look after people, got to care for them, and factor this in, and try to help people in various ways. That was the way to respond to that, really.
Yeah, a good takeaway. We just need to be a little bit more kind, a little bit more caring, help
Exactly.
lift people up as much as we can. Yeah,
that's exactly it. Yeah, that's always the mission here, I think.
You've mentioned long COVID a couple of times. I'm curious to dive into long COVID. What do we really know about how the COVID virus affects the brain, and what do we know about long COVID?
Well, that's a really good one because it began to emerge, and doctors saw it and GPs began to see it, people ended up in hospital with these persistent symptoms. So it was a real thing. I'll start with that. Secondly, then a lot of research begins, which is tremendous. And over the past year or so, great discoveries have been made about long COVID. And there's a few options as to why it happens. One is the virus persists, and it's somehow in your body and it's burning away in the background, and all these symptoms are being driven by this low-grade infection that's with you. Remember, the symptoms are very reminiscent of if anybody gets the flu. You'll feel bad for a few days. That's your own immune system, actually, making you. It's called sickness behavior. And it evolved to get us away from the herd, by the way, to stop a virus spreading. Isn't that amazing? So you feel a bit depressed. You go into your cave, under your straw, you feel a bit lethargic, you can't eat, and you lie around a bit, you have a fever, all these things, you get brain, you can't concentrate. That's an evolved response to an infection. But eventually you clear the infection and you get better. In this case, those symptoms persist. Now, one reason is the virus is there. The second is your immune system has fought a main battle against this virus and is now off kilter. And some of those immune troops continue to think there's a war going on.
Yeah.
A bit like the Japanese soldier that came out of the jungle in 1960 or whatever, thinking there was still World War II was going on. So the immune system is off kilter. It's autoimmune then, actually, and that begins to attack your own tissues and cause some of the symptoms there. And one recent breakthrough in Trinity was, as you may have seen, the blood-brain barrier seems to be breached.
Yeah. And
that's quite a dangerous thing, because then many things can get from your blood into your brain. Your microbiome and your gut might leak things into your brain, and some of those symptoms could be driven by that, So that was an important finding, we feel. And then literally last night, actually, I came across a paper at a big study in London. They've looked at loads of long COVID patients, and at last they've got biomarkers. They can measure parts of the inflammatory process being up in people with this condition. Two particular things. One is called IL-1, which I work on in my lab, actually. That seems to be up. And I think I'll complement. Now, that immediately suggests therapeutics. If you can lower those, you make it rid of some of these symptoms. So it's a complicated thing, but all this research is giving us new insights. And of course, very importantly, it'll go beyond COVID into things like Lyme disease or post-viral fatigue syndrome or chronic fatigue. All these things have been there for years. We've known for a long time infections can provoke this sort of long-term symptomology, very debilitating to people. So our great hope here is one of the COVID dividends will be we learn from this in COVID. It'll apply to other post-infectious situations that are very debilitating for people as well. So it's really good example of scientists getting stuck in and trying to figure what's going on.
Yeah. Do we have any idea why it seems to affect some people and not others? And it seems to, and of the people that it seems to affect, it seems to be incredibly debilitating. But then some people seems to have walked away with, people are collecting COVID like they're Pokemon. Like people, I've
I
talked to
know,
people and they
yeah,
got it six,
exactly.
7 times. Like,
Yeah.
and they don't seem affected at all. Do we have any sense for what the difference is there
Love to know that. This London study, they found six subtypes. Can you believe it? Probably six separate subtypes with different features.
of long COVID?
Yep. And if you
Wow.
got
Okay.
subtype number one, you're inclined to have brain fog. If you have subtype number two, you got heart problem. There's a whole range of symptoms that seem to
Wow.
prove. Now they're studying those people.
Yeah.
Now it could be genetic, remember, and it must be. There must be a genetic aspect because we're all slightly different. Our immune systems are, and you might have the wrong set of genes. You get a high dose infection, and bang, you develop long COVID. That's a likely scenario here.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is the dose of virus seems to be important. Um, some people a mild dose triggers it. In others, a high dose is needed. And again, this is there. So it's a big mystery why you see such a range.
Yeah.
And why, like any disease, really, but like some people develop rheumatoid arthritis and some don't. Some develop long COVID and some don't. So it's a really important question to try and get to the bottom of. Because that might tailor therapies. If there was six subtypes, you might have a drug for each subtype. There's
Yeah.
no point in giving drug number one to subtype number three because that's not the right sort of combination. That kind of thing should help us as well.
Yeah. Is quite this amount of variance is that a common feature of viruses like the post-viral syndrome? Is it common for it to impact such a small amount of people compared to how much it infected? Or is that a new sort of property of
No,
this
I think
virus?
so. The flu is similar. So
Yeah.
some have flu persistent symptoms and some don't. So it does seem to be a feature of any infectious disease with a certain percent. It's quite high with long COVID though, like as much as 10-20% of people have some kind of
Yeah.
symptom. You wouldn't get that with flu. It's much lower percentages there. So there's something funny going on there. It could be because, of course, eventually through our immune system being trained and learning, we'd all have similar levels of these things, ultimately a small number of people developing it and not more people. It could be a consequence of being a new virus and our immune system is still getting used to it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then once we are used to it, then it'll be less common. That's probably going to happen, we think. Because flu's been with us for a couple of thousand years, and Evan, that was amazes me that this is a new virus. It jumped into humans in the
Yeah.
year 2019. Remember, they reckon flu jumped in about 1,500 years ago. HIV, another famous virus, as we know, probably again 100 years ago that jumped. So you and I know about flu all our lives. It wasn't there once upon a time. It didn't infect humans. At some point.
Yeah. I just saw a case of an Olympian, I think it's a Dutch cyclist called Marlon Risser, I think is the name. But my strongest piece of evidence that long COVID is a thing that this is
Yeah,
a cyclist, and you have to be very sick as a cyclist not to get on the bike. These are the
yeah,
hardest
yeah.
people that exist, I think, in the world. So this person very unfortunately had to withdraw from the Olympics because of long COVID symptoms.
There you
You
have
know,
it. Yeah.
like there can't really be any argument on like people having a lack of motivation or just feeling down or just being lazy when these are
Ah,
Olympic level cyclists that are
exactly.
suffering these symptoms. These are people that are as hardworking physically as you
That's
can
right.
possibly get.
And even remember, for a long time, people with chronic fatigue syndrome were accused of that kind of thing. And they were
Yeah,
always saying, "Look, this is a real thing here." So one big benefit, if that's the right word for it, but nobody wants to say a benefit comes something nasty.
yeah,
But one benefit from this is it's now being taken seriously across many diseases, not just in COVID.
yeah, yeah. I'd love to dive into Inflazome. I know we don't have that much time, but I would love to hear the origins of that company and sort of some of the large key events that led it to be acquired for a decent sum of 380 million is the public figure.
Yeah,
What
that's right.
what's the story there?
So that's, I mean, it's a good story. It's a success now. I'm happy to talk about success. So, all my career, I've tried to find novel anti-inflammatory drugs. That's been a key mission for me all the way along. In fact, I began working on things like aspirin and Nurofen back in the 80s. Can you believe it? And they're anti-inflammatory. And
Yeah,
lo and behold, in the year 2012, it began really. We've stumbled into a very potent anti-inflammatory molecule. It blocks the thing called NLRP3. Now, NLRP3 is a very important master switch for inflammation. It gets pushed over in all these inflammatory diseases. NLRP3 gets overactive. We've got a few ideas why that would be. A good example is Parkinson's disease, to be honest, because in that disease, a protein called alpha synuclein builds up in your brain. and that drives inflammation, and that damages the brain. And NLRP3 is there to cause the inflammation. So it's been kicking around for a while, and we found a way to block it. And then we formed a company, Inflazome, in 2016 to develop molecules that could really potently block it, which we did. The original molecule, Evan, was a Pfizer molecule. The drug company Pfizer owned it, actually. And they had an anti-inflammatory, didn't know what it did. All my lab did was show up like NLRP3. That was the add-on, we made. But that was never optimum. We optimized Pfizer's drug, and then we get to 2020, and then we say, look, we got to develop this further. And we couldn't raise enough money to go into clinical trials. That's a lot of money. And luckily, Roche bought us, the big Swiss company Roche, and they're now in the clinic with 3 diseases. And as we speak, there's people with Parkinson's on our drugs being tested in them.
Incredible.
So it's a good example of a thing that began in my lab in Trinity, the search for anti-inflammatories, picking that target. I had the insight to go, oh, let's block this thing. This thing looks interesting. Let's see if we can find a way to block it. I knew the guys in Pfizer anyway, and then we got it going. And then I met a chemist at a conference from Brisbane. He began making molecules, his lab, and we ended up with these really potent molecules. I mean, it sounds so much straightforward. It was very difficult, of course, to raise money. We raised 40 million in investment. Now, our investors got the lion's share of the 380 because that's what happens.
Yeah.
The investors want to be getting a 6-7-fold return on their investment, remember?
Yeah.
That's the way venture capital works, My university made loads of money. They were shareholders. It was great. Trinity made a bit of money from it. I made, all the employees made a bit, including myself. So we all benefited from financially. The other bit that people are amazed by, Evan, is the Irish taxpayer made loads of money because the Irish government were investing in Inflazome through a venture capital fund called Fountain, if you know what I mean. There's the thing of the Irish Strategic Investment Fund. They gave money to Fountain gave money to us, and they got a divvy from the money as well. So it's great. I think they made about 60 million in the end, went back to the exchequer. So everybody won financially, especially the investors. Although that's understandable. But most importantly for me personally, I'm now got a drug in patients.
Yeah.
That hasn't worked yet, remember. And there's many things fail. It can be very difficult to get things through. But now we're in clinical trials. Let's see what happens next. So it's a wonderful, exciting time for us. If it works, you can imagine. If we can slow down Parkinson's.
It's history making.
Again, remember, it's probably not going to work. Many things don't work at this stage, so don't hold your breath. But still, at least we're in the clinic testing it. So let's hope it works out.
No, it's absolutely fantastic, and huge congratulations. It's amazing. I graduated neuroscience in Trinity, and then I went and ran a startup. So I built my own language learning startup for 4 years. That's what I did right out of college. I started a company called Weave, where we were building AI technologies for language learning in my final year. So that's why I was very interested in hearing the Inflazome story, because I spent
you know what it's like then. I mean,
countless hours pitching to venture capitalists trying to raise money.
Endless pitches. I mean, to write the initial raise wasn't that bad. I knew the guys in Fountain from before, and that was okay. Second round investment had to be argued for. The big effort was trying to sell it to a big drug company. We made loads of presentations to all the big drug companies.
I'm sure.
And many passed on and said, "No, we don't want this. We don't like the look of it, or whatever it is."
Yeah.
Thankfully, Roche stepped up at the end, which was great for us, really. And I could have fallen over, as you know, it's very uncertain. So I had a few failures along the way as well with other companies. So
you always do.
As you know, perseverance is your friend in this situation. If you really believe in it, you got to keep going.
Absolutely. What do you think are some of the key differences between a biotech startup and a normal startup are? Like, I think it's not particularly clear sometimes when someone reads the headline, Roche buys Inflazome for a crazy boatload of cash. It's not clear what they're actually buying. What explain some of those key differences maybe between our company that was developing a language learning product, selling it directly to customers, and then a research lab that discovered a drug and then was bought by a larger company.
Well, they bought the drugs. We made a number of molecules, like real molecules,
Yeah.
And they bought 2 of our drugs. The price was for 2 chemicals. Can you believe it? Evan? These structures. Now, we have patents on them, obviously. Nobody else can make them. And those patents go out for 20 years. They bought 2 molecules for that amount of money. It always amazes me how a single molecule can cost you billions, this kind of thing, But the value of this is, if it gets into Parkinson's, they're going to make billions out of this drug, remember, as well. So that's the other end of it. So they bought the 2 drugs, that's it. And then they also have all the data around them, obviously. We'd loads of work. We'd done lots of stuff on them. We'd done a phase 1 trial in humans, actually, already, and it was safe, We'd done lots of testing of various kinds to show it should work and all that kind of thing. So there was a data pack. So they bought the 2 drugs backed by loads of data, and that's what they bought in the end. So it's straightforward at one level.
Yeah.
You're right, though. The biotech business is highly risky, though, remember. I think that the risk profile is much higher in biotech than it is in ICT, for instance.
Yeah.
Like in ICT, they're just making widgets, aren't they, or something, or whatever it is, not to demean them. But we're dealing with complex human biology here. You're trying to figure out these very complex diseases, so it's high risk. It's a
Yeah.
riskier proposition for biotech, really.
It seems crazy when you're building a technology product, what you're doing is you're launching it basically every week. You're updating it, you're building a slightly different
Yeah,
thing. With a biotech company, you kind of have to bet the kitchen sink on a clinical trial. At some point, you have
you
to
do.
reach a certain level of confidence and just say, right, we're betting basically like I don't know many companies, you probably only maybe get 2 or 3 rounds maximum at a clinical trial. Like it's a huge risk.
It is huge.
Is that correct?
Well, you need the big drug companies because they've got deep pockets, remember.
Yeah.
And each trial is costing them 100 million at the moment, for instance, in cash. It's cost to run the trial.
Yeah.
And the success rate might be 10-20% from that. It's incredible. So you need to go to the big ones. And the good news is, I suppose, in general, is big drug companies do reinvest their profits in more medicines, remember, and pay for this stuff. And then, of course, many fail. So you need those deep pockets to run these trials, and that's why you need the big drug. We couldn't have raised that amount of money with venture anymore. It was too much.
Yeah.
So hence the model, as we call it, is you get acquired. You can go public, though, sometimes and raise money that way. But in general terms of biotech, you get acquired by one of the big companies is the model.
Yeah. Yeah. Like in tech, you get acquired by Google or Amazon, the larger technology companies who want to integrate you into their tech stack in some way.
Yeah.
Important part of the ecosystem.
They know what they're doing, remember. They've developed loads of drugs. They can do the trials. They can do all the necessary safety checks and all these kinds of things. So you're with the right people.
Yeah, it's an amazing success story, and I wish those clinical trials success. I'll be following them, and hopefully we can get on the podcast again and discuss the results because that would be incredible.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I mean, again, I'm on TED Talks. I hate talking about it, even though I'm a scientist. I don't know put the mockers on it. You never know. I get superstitious. Actually, to be honest, 3 of my drugs are in the clinic at the moment.
Yeah.
The Inflazome one of another company called Citrix. They've got a molecule in the clinic, and a second molecule about to go in the clinic. So I'm going to have 3 separate drugs with different. Surely one by the laws of averages,
Because each of those molecules has got to feel like a child, like when you start a business, like you put so much emotion, tears, capital, energy, everything into them. It's a child.
It's a child, and you're scared for the child in the big bad world. It's that kind of thing,
Of course, absolutely. All right, let's do some rapid fire. That was amazing. I read that COVID affects sperm. Rapid fire questions.
Oh, hadn't heard that. No, that's new. Evan, you're ahead. I didn't know it affected sperm now. No, I don't. I'd say no to that probably though. I think it's unlikely.
Okay, brilliant. Bald men didn't get as sick during the pandemic.
There was some evidence for that. Yes, testosterone seemed to have some protective effect. Maybe that was a good one. Yeah.
Okay. The coronavirus could be 300 million years old.
Oh, the family might go back a long way. Yeah, there's loads of coronaviruses, remember. In fact, there was one that give us the common cold. 1 in 5 common colds before this were caused by coronavirus. They go back a long way.
Yeah. Music is a big part of your life. How do you think your music career has impacted your science?
Oh, that's my hobby.
Yeah.
You see, you have to have some downtime, don't you? You can't be thinking about this stuff 24/7, otherwise you go mad.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful relaxer, great fun as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Men were affected more in the COVID pandemic than women were?
They were more severe in men. For that still holds up, actually. Men are inclined to do worse with COVID, and they still do. Yeah, that's true.
Do you think China concealed important information at the start of the COVID pandemic that would help the rest of the world?
That's hard to know. My best answer to that, Evan. I think it's unlikely, though. I think certainly the sequence came out pretty quickly. The guy, though, who released the sequence, he was punished for that. Having said that, I think it's unlikely that our big question there is, was it a lab leak or not? That's the question.
Yeah.
And we just don't know. We don't know what was going on there, and we can't be sure about these things really.
Yeah. Was there any proven efficacy with ivermectin?
Never. That was the scandal, the way that was promoted, and it was a big fail for the ones who were advocating for it. There was never any evidence of that working.
Okay. What did you miss the most during the lockdown?
The pub. Couldn't go for a drink.
The answer of every Irishman, honestly, was devastating.
Very predictable, that's right.
Best ways for people that they can boost their immune system?
Oh, yeah, well, it's the usual things. A healthy lifestyle. Exercise is a wonderful benefit to the immune system. If you do one thing, try and go for a walk. Not high impact stuff. Like exercise is a great boost for our immune system.
Yeah. Most interesting thing you've ever learnt in science?
Oh, good Lord. Now, there's a terrifying question. I think the most interesting I learned in science is that, let's see now, that a thing called endosymbiosis happened 2 billion years ago, when a bacteria crawled inside another bacteria, and we are descended from that organism. Isn't that incredible? So we're descended from this very interesting relationship between two bacteria 2 billion years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I have to. Before the podcast, I said that we had a number of lectures with you, and that's what your lectures were about. Basically, how life started.
That's right. Even the origin of life. That's right.
Yeah, and it's so profoundly amazing, and I
Isn't
really
it?
think
Oh,
that
yeah.
those lectures impacted my life in
Oh,
lots of ways.
incredible.
I'm
Isn't it?
so passionate about scientific communication, and I really believe it's because of those early lectures where you were so energetic, so charismatic, just such a good communicator. I
Oh,
remember
you're very
thinking if I
kind.
can have a scratch of the impact in scientific communication as this man, it would be an incredible career. And I really think that those lectures have an untold, impact on my direction going forward. So this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting to me. I really hope we can do it again. I am Professor Luke Neill. It's an honor.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Evan. That was great fun.
Great conversation. Thanks so much. All the best with everything. I'll be checking out those clinical trials.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Thank you
Cheerio.
so much, Luke. Really appreciate it.